We are in the midst of an astonishing explosion in digital payments. Every day, billions of transactions generate a very large volume of data, data that represents both an opportunity and a risk. Payments companies need to harness this data, understand this data, draw trends from this data, and also protect and secure this data. Obviously, artificial intelligence is emerging as a force multiplier in this process. It's also something we as consumers encounter on a daily basis, sometimes with some frustration, when you call up a service provider or its number and you don't meet a human interface, but you meet an artificial intelligence solution. Sometimes it works and sometimes, well, we've all been challenged. But anyway, let me get straight into the nub of the discussion with Nitendra Rajput, who's Vice President and Head of MasterCard's AI Garrett Center here in India. Welcome to GTS. Nitendra, let me begin with a question that no Indian stakeholder in the economy or policymaker is ever immune to, which is the state of small businesses in India. So important in this country, small entrepreneurs and small businesses. How can and what role can AI play in providing smaller businesses opportunities to succeed in an open network ecosystem?
Thank you, Ashok, for the question, and I'm glad to be here. And thanks for organizing this, everyone. Great point that you've raised. I think the most important thing is to understand the small businesses, which usually at times what happens is that when there is a significant leap either in technology or in anything, it kind of, there is this assumption, or at times it also happens that it kind of creates the divide, it increases the divide, which means the rich becomes richer and the poor becomes poorer. And, you know, back in the days when there were those film studios, you know, RK studios and so on, where you would go in and that's where all the movies used to be made, all the content used to be made, and that's what we used to watch. That had a significant divide because it was only exclusive. You needed very sophisticated equipments, the cameras and so on and so forth, and only then you can produce content. Now, with the advent of mobile phones, with the advent of platforms, the OTTs, the YouTubes of the world, and so on, we see that the barrier to be able to create content and be able to create good content and so on has reduced significantly, and that is why the content creation is not limited just to those very few production houses. So now you see the YouTubers and so on is actually a profession, right? I mean, they generate as much advertisements as any other big production houses as well. So there is a time when a technology like AI, when it came initially, perhaps it would have created that barrier because not everyone would have had access to it and so on. But now is the time when it is getting commoditized, and which is the opportunity for small and medium businesses wherein they can actually use these technologies and be as scalable, be as robust as any large business. You go to the cloud, you get these services, and then you adopt them, and which is in some sense happening in India as well, because if we see, India is actually investing significantly in startups in the AI space. We are ranked number in the top 5 in the world with respect to our investment in startups. And our economy on AI is also growing significantly. Like, it is expected that we are going to be generating about $1 trillion worth through AI, in adding that to our GDP in 10 years from now, right? So huge numbers, and it cannot come for an economy like India. It cannot come just with a select few large corporations. So I think the seed is definitely there for AI to be utilized in the small and medium businesses. The environment is there so that it is commoditized enough so that you don't need really significant, huge investments. And obviously the need is there because you need these tools as a small business. I need to have a reach which needs to extend, which has to go through digital. I need to have mechanism through which I can accept payments in different forms. India is definitely growing very fast in the digital payment space. So if I have all of those tools, then my business can really move fast. So it's a huge opportunity, and I think the timing is also right now when you have these things commoditized and significantly easily accessible to all of us.
So let me take you to a question that flows from something you just said. Small companies are nimble, typically nimble. AI is disruptive. It's a marriage made in heaven. But the payment gateway industry is large. It's risk averse. It's perhaps even conservative, if I could use that word. How has AI changed it? How has this engagement with AI been?
I see. Yeah, it's a great point that you mentioned that payment industry is conservative because, in some sense, the industry that adopted AI the first, perhaps, or almost very quickly, was actually the payments industry. I mean, because when you are dealing with a large volume of payments data, you cannot live with doing it in a manual manner, right? You need some automation out there. How is that automation possible? Perhaps by putting in some rules like transactions from country A to country B more than some particular dollar looks like fishy, so let me put up that rule. But the payments industry is where most of the fraudsters in the world sit. So if you make this particular rule, they'll identify that, oh, this rule exists, so let me break this rule by moving that same amount from country A to C and then to B. So rules don't work. So that's why, whether it of its nature or whether of its need, actually payments industry was very first to actually adopt AI because it had to change basis how people are going to make and break the system in some sense. And to manage this huge amount of data that exists in the payment industry, I mean, MasterCard itself processes more than 100 billion transactions a year. You need some automation there to protect those transactions and so on. So that actually, that adoption, because of the need, perhaps has happened much faster in the payments industry and in the networks. I believe we call them conservative because they take their time to make sure that the regulations are met, they operate across multiple countries and so on and so forth. Things need to be robust and tried and tested before you can move them in the environment, the live environment. But that doesn't mean that they are slow, perhaps. Yeah. And that adoption in the payment industry is actually significantly high for AI. I mean, I can talk of my organization. So like MasterCard has saved more than $35 billion of fraud in the last 3 years, which speaks volumes of the value of this technology in this particular industry and the need in some sense as well.
So you spoke of AI being an accelerator, of pushing transactions to move faster. Can it also be a sort of traffic signal? With more digital payments, there's also more fraud. There's cybersecurity risk, there's online scamming. Most recently, we've read in the newspapers, deepfake was used to essentially cheat a consumer. Can AI check this? Can AI facilitate fraud?
Absolutely. I think it's more like a tool, a powerful force that if organizations do not use, the bad guys are going to use it. So it's definitely available for everyone. Now imagine a situation where organizations have not adopted AI. That doesn't stop the fraudsters to not adopt AI. And if you have a system that is vulnerable, if it's a rule-based system, if it can break, then imagine what it can be doing for people who can automatically generate a large number of transactions. If one not, then the other one will actually go through the system. So it can definitely hamper significantly. I mean, AI can be used to break into payment systems as well. And as we see, like the amount of attacks that now happen on the cyber world, whether it is through ransomware, malwares, or even breaking into the systems and so on, they have increased. And I think that's the reason why the whole cyber security space is actually expected to grow at 23% every year, because you're right. Back in the days, 20 years from now or even more, when I would go to take 5,000 rupees from my bank, I would go to that bank, which is like 3 kilometers away from my house, and I'm carrying that 5,000 rupees and I'm bringing it to my home. My exposure is limited to that 3 kilometers, wherein someone may come with a knife or whatever and then try and take that 5,000 rupees. That same amount or maybe more, when I'm going to do a transaction at a particular merchant, that amount is actually moving not 3 kilometers, but maybe 3,000 kilometers. It moves through the cyber network, through the cyber world and so on. The people who used to carry the knives and the swords or whatever are now carrying these sophisticated machines, computers, and they will use AI to figure out whether I break into through this IP address, whether I break into this particular device, whether I break into this network or not, and so on. And that is why you definitely need AI to protect all of that rather than just that 3-kilometer kind of a road that we earlier have. So definitely there is a huge demand to protect the much broader ecosystem, which is kind of conversations. Because it is not possible for one particular entity, whether it is the government or a private sector or a particular company, to secure and come up with specific regulations in this particular space. I mean, we can think of AI as the fact that it is a car that can move really fast on the road. Right now, we are used to driving in an environment which allows us to drive at 50, 60, 70, 80 kilometers an hour and so on, right? Suddenly there is this car which can now drive at 500 kilometers an hour. Now everyone would want to adopt it because we all want to reach our destination fast. But we are driving this car in an ecosystem on the road that was designed for that particular speed. We have traffic rules, which means you start to see the traffic signal 40 meters ahead, 60 meters ahead, assuming that the car is going to drive at 60 kilometers an hour. If you want to drive a car at 500 kilometers an hour, then maybe you need to have some orange lights far earlier and so on, right? You need to make sure that the zebra crossing is such, you need to make sure that the footpath is such and so on. And then it will be safe for that car to drive as fast. Now, who gets into that discussion? Is it the private organization, as you said, which is the car manufacturer? Would they be able to do this on their own? Definitely not. I mean, they can provide all the security features in the car, but the car needs to drive in the society. And that's where I think you rightly said that it is the role and responsibility of those car manufacturers, which in this case are the private organizations, the banking, the payment companies and so on, the regulators, which is a significant part of the government and so on, people from the society who need to understand and make sure that what is it that will work fine and safe and so on. All of them need to come together and come up with some regulations that are going to improve the ecosystem and keep it safe, yet do not hamper it so that we kind of are in a very regulated environment so that we do not thrive on that innovation perhaps. So I think it's more of a responsibility of everyone to come up and have this discussion while we build our own things which are more safe and secure.
Okay, my final question before we move to the audience, if you have time for a question or two, is relates to India's chairpersonship of GPAI. Given this role, given this responsibility, given India's leadership of the Global South, especially in the technology and digital domains, which became apparent at the G20 summit, how can India take the lead, and Indian companies and Indian developers take the lead in taking countries of the Global South towards a responsible and yet opportunity-laden AI ecosystem?
Yeah, and this is a very timely question because GPI is in some sense the next week, the summit. And, you know, back when the IT revolution started in India, in some sense in the world, India was actually one of the leaders there. And a lot of what we see in terms of growth of India in the last 30 to 40 years has a lot to do with the IT revolution. We were one of those countries which actually lapped onto that wave very well, and then we see the transformation in our country. And I think that's the same opportunity that this country has now with respect to leading in the AI revolution wave. One, because we have huge amounts of skill, the manpower that we have, the skill that we have in the AI is significantly large as compared to any other country in the world. Secondly, we have the workforce that actually also is adopting it. I mean, look at the growth of payments in India. The digital payments in India is like outpacing any other country out there. So we lap onto that very quickly as well. And then India is now taking this leadership role, thankfully, through GPI, and that too very timely, because the mandate that we have is that, and Prime Minister called this out in this B20 event earlier, that basically what we want is a global framework for ethical AI. And in some sense it is required because if we see again, coming back to the traffic and the roads and so on and so forth, there are no specific rules which are completely different in all different countries. The rules are more or less similar. Every country has those 3 traffic signal colors, right? Every country has a zebra crossing, every country has lanes, every country has a concept of speed limit and so on. These things change, but the overall abstraction out there is the same. And that is why when I walk, customer somewhere else is going to be using that. Within a matter of 1 minute of that transaction, you would have covered 7-10 different geographies. Now, if all of them have very, very defined and very different regulations, it's going to be very hard to do this interoperability. And therefore, I think as part of this GPI, as part of India's position in this leadership in this space, in the global South area and so on, we should be leading by example, and perhaps we are in the right position to do that for the urgency, the need, why we need some kind of a global framework, and for the fact that if we do not do that, we'll remain very isolated and we are not going to utilize the potential of AI, what it can actually deliver to all the people in the region here.
Nitendra, we're down to the last 100 seconds, so I'm going to give you one quick question for a quick answer. We've had this debate about AI and widespread net job displacement. Is that inevitable, or is there still a question mark about it?
I mean, job displacement is perhaps the right word. The definitions of jobs will change and so on, but it's more like a new tool that has come up. We are going to use that tool to change our lives. That's all. So it's not that people will go away and people will move in and so on. So moves will happen, but it's not going to be reducing or increasing something, is what I feel.
So we'll have new types of jobs, perhaps, new types of uses, but some people will lose jobs, some people will create opportunities.
Exactly, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Nitendra. We've reached the end of our time, and thank you so much for doing this. This was fascinating. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. Hand you back to the organizers.